welcome to another episode of Unrestricted Live. My name is Athena, and I am a productivity coach and marketing and business strategist. And I started Unrestricted Live to bring you stories and inspiration of people who are living their lives differently and outside of the norms. I'm really excited for today's guest because we're increasingly becoming wary of the societal norms being imposed on us. Many of us dream of being catalysts for change, but often think that we can't make a difference just by ourselves. We dream of running away or updating antiquated systems with our current reality. It's hard to deny that there are serious changes happening all around us. So what can we learn from history to help us be change makers? Where can we find inspiration to break the rules for the better and get unrestricted from the toxic norms that are pervasive in our modern culture? My next guest has been leading a revolution rooted in the history of pirates. By looking towards some of the most famous revolutionaries for inspiration, she's been at the forefront of enabling people to be more pirate. This way of thinking has inspired many to take on the system and become professional rule breakers. So what can we learn from harnessing our inner pirate? So I'm super excited to welcome my next guest, Alex Barker, who is the captain of Be More Pirate. Hello.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to Unrestricted. Like, you guys are the definition of unrestricted. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. But before we get into why we should look at pirates for inspiration, please tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and where you're tuning in from.
Sure. So I'm here in London, rainy London, and I'm British, as you can probably tell. I grew up just outside of London, actually. So it sounds like I haven't moved very far, but I have traveled a lot in that interim period. But yeah, I guess, like, background wise, that's relevant to this is that things really started to unravel for me, let's say, or I started to ask some serious questions around about university time. So I studied literature initially. I actually studied comparative literature, which is slightly different to English lit. So I was really looking at a really broad range of texts that were definitely more unusual, looking at writers, like more obscure writers and different voices from all over the world, and quite deliberately choosing peripheral narratives. This was like around 2008. So we just had this huge financial crisis, and I came out of university going, what am I going to do? There's no jobs. Everyone was telling me there was no jobs. I was really listening to that story. And so I decided to continue studying, and I switched to do politics. I switched to do international relations. And that was really pivotal because I guess I was trying to do something more serious. I felt that I should understand how the world works. There was a few moments that were quite sort of revelationary. One being that I realized that politics is so driven by storytelling. So all that understanding I had from my previous degree was actually more relevant than I ever imagined, and that the things I thought I should be learning are actually not so important, or equally important. And I also really started to question the theories that we were being taught. We were very much taught a sort of neoliberal narrative, and I guess unpicking that all about kind of rational man and the fact that we are self-interested beings and that states behave the same way. And I remember thinking, I don't think this doesn't feel true. I think that people have different psychologies based on their experiences. And I think that people and states are the same, that different countries do behave quite differently based on their history. And I was looking at that through the lens of Middle East politics specifically. But I think it just sowed the seed for me of questioning what are the stories we're being told and why. But at the time, I didn't really have the courage or the conviction to really challenge it. And that was quite interesting as well, that in a university space, which is supposed to be critical thinking, wasn't that critical. Actually, this is the space in which you can question things, but not really question the dominant stories. So yeah, and then I went on many journeys. After that, I went backpack around the Middle East to try and understand it from a frontline perspective and really see what the people were experiencing there. And then I ended up in the charity sector, did a bit of campaigning on international development. And again, that was another really pivotal moment of realizing how unequal the world was, and that we were deliberately making it that way, and people knew about it, but it was just continuing. And then I guess I had a semi-quarter life crisis of like, what am I really going to do? How do I make myself useful in all of this mess? And ended up through various routes working for a think tank where I at least started to understand what my skill set was. And I fell into communications and about how at least can we communicate the best ideas to an audience and figure out how they can gain traction. So that's sort of where that's my background up until Be More Pirate, really.
It's so interesting, like you and I have such a similar path. I think like obviously completely different paths, but that in university, like, hang on a minute, this doesn't sound right. And then just as you keep going through and peeling back the layers, like how we're almost living in this reality where we think we have freedom to express ourselves in the way we want to, but societal norms dictate that you need to follow step, you know, and there's a fear or peer pressure to not really step out of line too much, you know, you can dare a little bit, but not too much. So when we look at history, often we get the history told to us by our countries and that narrative. So I find the project that you're working on is really interesting because it's exploring a different side of a narrative in history than we might not have been told before. So when we think of pirates, often it's portrayed in the media as being very sinister characters. They were very bad, but this is actually a misconception, and this is the foundation of this revolution that you've started. So tell us a bit about the positive history of pirates and why we can start to look at that for inspiration for how we can change.
Yeah. The history of pirates, when I've discovered it eventually through Sam's book, you know, it wasn't actually that surprising. I was like, of course, the establishment covered up people who were threatening to the dominant story. That makes total sense. But the untold history of the golden age of piracy, which is a really small period of history, starting around 1695. There was a bit of piracy before that, but this is like the real kind of change-making piracy era. Mm-hmm. And you can draw such clear parallels to where we are now, but a group of young professionals who just looked around at the world and were like, well, I'm not going to win here. All the wealth is concentrated at the top. I'm paid unfairly, if at all. And the young professionals we're talking about were predominantly sailors in the Navy because there was such demand for Navy crews at the time. They would deliberately over-recruit to the Navy because 40% of sailors died on any voyage. So you were literally signing up to your own death, 50-50. And there was no chance of really any real reward at the end of it. So it's not really surprising that people might have started to seek out a different route. And even though pirates were hung if they were caught, that risk was almost worth it because of how dangerous and grim the conditions were on Navy ships. So yeah, pirates set out and charted their own course. They started as these small crews who said, we're going to, steal a ship and we're going to go off and do our own thing. And then they created all these new innovations. Innovation's a bit of a buzzword, really, to talk about it. I've gotten used to talking about it in those terms, but really it was just a new ways of living and working together that were a direct reaction against what they'd experienced. So it was like, we're not going to do that again. So what are we going to do? We're going to look after each other. So they created social insurance. So if you got injured, you would actually get some level of compensation for the risk that you'd endured. So it meant that if you went into battle, you knew you wouldn't just be left for dead. And that incentivized people to actually fight, stand up and fight. They had equal say, so all the decisions and the pirate code that came to being was decided on democratically. Even just one rule or one article in the code had to have complete consensus from everybody. They had transparent pay and equal pay, relatively so, well, definitely compared to what we now have with CEOs and whatnot. And they even had same-sex marriage. Like, they didn't shy away from what was going on. They knew that money caused conflict, and they also had dual governance. So the captain and the quartermaster were equals. The captain would do the sort of strategy, in charge of the direction of sail, and the quartermaster would look after the culture and the people and the crew and deal with the punishment and the money, the things that would be corrupted by the captain. So there was this very deliberate structure to ensure that they thrived, that was predicated on fairness and equality. So whatever you think about what pirates did outside of their own crew, they looked after their own people. Mm-hmm. And we don't even have that in organizations today. Like, we're still fighting for equal pay. We're still fighting for looking after marginalized groups. So that all got stamped out of some of the ideas that pirates pioneered have become part of concepts of civilization. But there's still an impetus within our current society to hoard power and concentrate it and not distribute it, and not recognize how damaging it is when you don't distribute power. So many people read Be More Pirate, which is Sam's book, and they found in that story the parallel. They were like, wow, this is what we need to return to.
So it's a great segue into what is Be More Pirate and your role within that. But just before you answer that question, I think there's a massive parallel going on right now. And even to find out like this kind of society existed hundreds and hundreds of years ago, where they recognized that they needed to look after each other and have some balance and distribution of power, and also like just taking care of people if they got hurt. I still think it's absolutely ludicrous that in the United States you can be bankrupt for getting ill, like, and
Right.
you're just on your own, your fault for getting cancer kind of thing. There's so many of these things prevalent, and even in workplaces, well-being, it's kind of a buzzword, but most places do not actually look after people's well-being or ensure that people are able and capable to look after themselves. I think this pandemic is a perfect example. All of a sudden, women were relegated back to the dark ages because they just had to assume schooling their children as well as looking after their children the whole time and somehow try to keep their job going. And most workplaces did not even ask people if they had to take care of their children. Yeah. or make any sort of allowances for that. So yeah. It's a little ranty thing, but I think just looking at like how pirates were looking after each other back then, it's no wonder that kind of history was kept from us. So tell us about Be More Pirate and what you actually do there.
Just to add to that, like Pirates won, USA 0 on the well-being front, and they embraced diversity. There were female pirates, there were black pirates. They freed slaves and brought them on board. They were a proper meritocracy, but that's just an aside. So Be More Pirate. So Be More Pirate is this book. Is it on screen? Yes. It's written by Sam Conniff, who is a sort of entrepreneur, marketing guru. I probably hate it if I say that. Sam wrote the book in 2018, and after about 8 months of it being out in the world, he did a few publicity stunts to really get it noticed, and people started to read it. And I think, in a weird way, when you're an author, you sort of think, oh, what happens? You don't really think past when people actually start to read it and respond to you and respond to your ideas and take them seriously. And so he just ended up with this huge email folder of many unread messages from people that were in-depth stories about their lives and what they were doing and how the ideas and the principles really were needed and what they were doing about it, either in their workplaces, like breaking rules in the workplace, or even changing their entire life, like they'd attach their resignation letter. So he suddenly realized there was something in this that people were responding to, and there was momentum that he couldn't capture on his own. And I think he wasn't prepared to be at the forefront of a movement or a community or anything like that at the time. He had sort of gotten out of working in an organization. So he advertised for a right-hand pirate to come and support this. And because I'd had experience building sort of networks around social change concepts, I felt that I could probably bring some background knowledge, but also I was disillusioned enough to know we got to do this differently. And then I came on board and started to understand what these people were doing and talk to them and build relationships with them and capture all the insights to really go, what is it about these principles that make sense in modern workplaces? And then I started to take the role myself of being more of a figurehead of it, and I'd do talks and run my own workshops based on what my interpretation of the ideas and what was working. And Sam and I have very different styles anyway, so there's kind of audiences that I speak to more than he does, and so over time I kind of became quartermaster, then eventually became captain, because I guess I'd done the groundwork of really understanding what this means in reality in the 21st century, going much further beyond than just an inspiring concept, kind of manifesto. This is like, how do you apply it? How do you really be more pirate? Because it's tough, of course, like day to day, when everything else is pushing you in the opposite direction towards sort of conformity and fear. How do you stay pirate?
So that's manifested into a second book that just came out recently. I don't know if you've got that there to show us.
Too, yeah.
Yay.
Oh, wrong side.
Yeah. A little bit more in. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah. So the stories became developed enough to put into a new book. It actually really grew in scope. We anticipated it being a bit more of a handbook, but it's actually sort of become more of a full-length book. And there's a sort of framework in that. I mean, I hate frameworks and I hate theories because I think they're overused in management, but I could see a journey that people were going on. I could see there was patterns emerging. And there were things in how Sam had depicted it that I thought this needs to be the opposite way around. Like the pirate code is so much more integral to rebelling than he kind of put it at the end, that you'd end up with these new rules once you'd broken rules. But actually, it's so important that you understand your values and what you're standing for before you then try to attempt, a big rebellion of any kind. And also the inner rebellion. You've got to stand up to yourself first most of the time. That's so core. Peeling back those layers of permission that you don't give yourself before you even think about challenging. That inner work is really important.
100%. So I worked with Sam at Liberty for a couple years. The energy he brings and the inspiration that he brings, I haven't seen many speakers that are able to capture that. He kind of like sparks movements, which is no surprise that when he would write something like Be More Pirate and just giving us this background into these people that we've always been told were a certain way, but actually were a way that we would love to see that enacted now. And having that spark something in people is really beautiful. So when you put a concept like that out there and you actually see how people are interpreting it, you can learn so much more from that, because it's kind of like history and now it's like the modern take on that. So it's great that you've now brought it full circle and are helping people to take that inspiration and put it into reality. So give us some examples of people that you would say are being more pirate for positive change. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, God, there's so many examples I could give. An obvious and early one in terms of positive change that was so blatant in the respect of them writing their own pirate code, and it was so detailed. The confirmation for me and for Sam that this really mattered, because it came from a human rights NGO, and I was like, wow, they think we need piracy. And a really smart woman called Veronica Yates, who runs something called the Child's Rights International Network. And it resonated with me because she was challenging the charity sector, which I had a lot of experience in, saying, are we just chasing funding to keep ourselves in existence? Are we putting plaster over society's problems rather than digging into the roots? And so she was reading Be More Pirate and writing her strategy and goes, we don't need a strategy, we need a code. And so they really dug into their values, created that whole code. It's really detailed and loads of great challenges in it. But then that brought them to, what campaigns are we going to work on next? And they veered much further towards the edges of the map, which is a concept that's come out of Be More Pirate as well. They stopped challenging all the mainstream stuff that the other charities were doing as well, around like access to clean water and housing and all of that stuff that's obviously important for children. But they were like, what about the stuff no one talks about that just continues day to day, like modern slavery, around like the bodily integrity of children, like forced virginity testing, for example, and the sterilization of children with learning disabilities. So they started to really take on these more fringe issues, and they found that it really stood them in good stead, and they got more consistent funding, and their board liked them more because they were so clear and had so much new energy around it. So that was just a one kind of example of where they've taken it, and it allowed them to continue more purposeful work. But then there's lots of positive changes around workplace culture that I think are needed, that have happened through this, like just changing it from being sort of less toxic to being more open, more transparent. Lots of sort of shifts towards more equitable structures. A lot of people feel that they're told they're supposed to be collaborative, when actually a lot of it's geared towards competition. There's one team, in a brief example in the book, where a team restructured their bonus structure so that they could really collaborate on the sales team's goals rather than be in competition with each other and always have like a higher achiever. So lots of things like that. And then there's this whole crew in health and social care, which has huge social impact. And there's lots of rules they're trying to break around the type of people that they recruit to do the roles properly. But it's under a banner of what they call rehumanize the system, and that the system is too process driven. It's become a bit of an efficiency echo chamber. So how do you bring the humanity and the compassion and kindness and empathy back into our healthcare system? And it's so obviously so pertinent right now.
It's super exciting to hear that. There's so much in there that resonates with me, and it's great to have people like you out there giving people the framework, because I've had a lot of experience interacting with charities, and the model is broken, right? It's not actually structured in a way that they have self-reliance and autonomy. So a lot of things that they should be standing for, they don't necessarily, because they're getting donations from the very people that they should be standing up against. Yeah. So that model is flawed, and a lot of the issues that I'm very passionate about you peel back the layers and find out they're getting funding from people that they should be talking about, but they're not because they're getting funding there, So that's a wonderful example to hear that. And I think the more that we get transparency, the more that we start to go through these experiences, the more we're going to want things to change. So having that roadmap of like, how can we actually change this and how can we break rules? And something that's been completely evident to me during the last 8 months is everybody is reverting to science, right? And data and facts, and not really tapping into intuition, not tapping into who we are as humans. And also the people interpreting the data are not actually qualified to interpret data. So we're being bombarded with these messages from the media who want to scare you, to get you to watch more so they can sell more advertisements. And the people telling you these data points are not the people that actually created this data. They're not the ones that did the research on this data.
Yeah.
So there's this whole kind of thing that's happening right now where I'm really feeling this need for science isn't the end all be all for everything, right? There's a human element to it. And we know inherently when something's right or wrong. So I feel like there's a lot of that starting to bubble up, and hopefully we can be more pirate about how we're encouraging the people giving us information and the people making rules to not just revert to data and science, which can be misinterpreted very easily.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If I've learned anything, is that you can create a story out of data, whatever story you want to tell. So it's not as objective as I think we hear it and we go, oh, that means it's science, that means it's fact. And, there are facts in there, but yeah. So, there's so many things you said in there that made me think about how I apply those ideas. I think one of the things is the idea of proximity, in that, and this comes from health and social care, that so many of the systemic rules, let's say, that are made and that go wrong, that don't deliver, are because they are made by people who are too far away from the information source. And we are information sources about our own body, if we're going to talk about health. So that is really valid. It should be as valid as an expert's diagnosis and all the knowledge and all the things that they have, but that doesn't often get listened to. So I think that it's a general principle when I talk about why bad rules get created in the first place in most of our systems. It's because you've got some people over here making decisions in an ivory tower with no real understanding or insight of what's going on closer to the problem that they're trying to solve. And that I can take that on lots of different examples, but see it a lot in healthcare, and I've got mountains of evidence from our healthcare pirates. They respond to what the system can deliver rather than what people need, and that's really damaging. But there's also something you said about intuition, and there's a section at the end of this book about storytelling, and a sort of subsection called Follow the Signs, because that has come up so much when I've listened to people say, they go, I just really felt that this came to me at the right time, the time that I needed it. Or they'll say, this just felt like a sign for me. And I don't know, it's like you have this innate ability to recognize a moment when you're at a crossroads where something important is being said to you in some form. I know, and that's not scientific, but I've heard it over and over so many times that it would be wrong to ignore it. One woman came up to me at the end of a talk I did in Edinburgh, and she emailed me the next week. And she said, I took a picture of the graphic that you use for Be More Pirate that goes through all the words. It says, be more spirited, reckless, cunning, mischievous, and then ruthless. And she said it landed on be more ruthless. And I was at this moment where I was having to make a decision about leaving my job. I really had this bold plan to create a social enterprise, and then my work had just about guilted me back into staying. And I saw that, and I saw what it had landed on. And she goes, I just knew I couldn't. I had to take the leap. So it was this weird. She says, it's like a real sign. And yeah, I think that the only place I've seen it explained is in Malcolm Gladwell's book.
There's so much out there that tries to tell you that you need to outsource your intuition or outsource your health or outsource your emotions, or feel bad for having the emotions that you do, because we're still living in a society in most of the world where profit is king. So the main driver is buy more, buy more, buy more. And all of the messaging and all of the systems and all of the structures and all the competition is just about earning more profit. It's not about the well-being of people. It's not about your intuition. It's not about you feeling good. I'm really into this book right now called In the Flow, where she's breaking down all the stuff women have been withheld about their own health, their hormones, and it is just mind-blowing, like just the differences in our brains and how women actually have bigger parts of the brains that are connected to like emotion and intuition and being able to diffuse situations and stuff, and what we've not been told about ourselves. And also, like you mentioned, with policy being set up in a way that it's what they can deliver, most of the medical studies have been done on men because the researchers didn't want to account for the hormonal differences in women. So a lot of the medical information that we're getting, the science that we're getting, actually hasn't been studied on women. So there's this whole group of people that have very, very different biochemistries and bodies and hormones that this male, study and research is being applied to us without actually knowing if that's true or not.
Exactly. It's just a question of asking, how did we end up with these rules? As soon as you get into places where you imagined all the answers were, all the power was held, and you realize that they're not getting the information from the right places, or they don't fully understand everything, then it starts to unravel and you start to question a lot of things. Something you just said that reminded me, just on the period thing, like, imagine if, I don't know if it was you who mentioned this, but imagine if women were told that you can't actually get pregnant every day from the outset, like information that's just not translated because it's not as important. And that was where, that's where I was getting at with university, really going, how did we arrive at this conclusion? And I was also listening to a podcast the other day that was brilliant with an anthropologist called Jason Hickel. He was talking about how growth became the measurement of the economy. And it was a post-war period. It was meant to be aggressive because of the need during the war. And it was never supposed to be like a long-term plan.
Yeah, it's not sustainable, without having massive, expenses on people's well-being, the environment, and everything else. You just can't constantly grow when there's like finite resources available. But I think that brings me to my next point, which is a lot of people don't want to start asking these questions that you and I did, and that we continue to ask, or that people finally feel like they're ready to maybe like dip their toe into like, what is going on? And like, this isn't right. And it can be very overwhelming because it's like, what can I do as one person? So it's almost easier to be, intentionally ignorant to what's going on rather than to take on this idea of like, I don't even know where to start. There's so much going wrong here. There's so much that can be improved. So what would you tell people who think they can't make a difference on their own?
I would tell them that the only thing that ever has made a difference is small groups of people. That's a Meg Weekly quote, not me. But when you look at the whole thing, like, of course it's overwhelming. But I haven't really met a person yet who hasn't wanted to challenge at least something, even if it's just in their personal lives. So there's always a starting point of getting to the point of feeling your own power, of recognizing that you can be that change. I suppose that the two things that I talk about in terms of getting started, when it's like how to be more pirate, and this depends on really where you feel you are and your levels of confidence. So if there's something that frustrates you, find a few other people, a few allies who also on the same page. And just start by having a really informal meeting where you get to know each other, you share a bit of sort of the experience you've been having. And I find that it sort of generates from there. You don't have to come in with an agenda or an action plan. It's just concentrating on why you're there, why you want to be there, and kind of getting that solidarity. And then the other sort of starting point would be what we call small, bold actions. So this is really to try to just shake things up a little bit. And it doesn't have to be something that's going to get you into trouble. It can just be something to sort of slap yourself in the face a little bit, to go, it might just be asking that question to the person that you've thought about it, but you've never really done it, and or sending an email to someone, or reaching out to someone you want to talk to, but you're too afraid, and just seeing what that feels like. Because that's really, it's not even about the impact that it has or the consequences like in the outside world. It's about the feeling of going, like, I can do that and maybe the world won't crumble.
Yeah.
You've got to feel, and that's usually what happens, is it's far less ripple than you imagine. And that just gives you the boldness to then start to build on that and start to flex that muscle. For example, just recently, we were creating some videos for the launch of the new book, and I was ripping some political speeches. And, you know, part of me was going, oh God, am I going to get into trouble for this? And blah, blah, blah. And really what happens is no one gives a shit. Like, you know, it goes into the echo chamber of the internet. But, and I recognized that in myself. I was like, oh God, like get over this. Like, even if it does, whatever, because I've kind of gone through that quite a few times with myself. But yeah, so I think what I always say with the small, bold actions is if you're thinking about doing something, in particular, if it's something that's going to maybe get you into a bit of trouble, just map the consequences. It's actually will make you feel better. Like, think about what the worst case scenario could be.
I love that.
It's usually not getting fired, as people often say to me, what if I get fired? I'm like, have you read any of your policies? Can you actually get fired for this? Is what you're really afraid of the awkward, uncomfortable confrontation that you're going to have to endure as a result of this? But then I say map out the best case scenario, because what if you win? Like, what if amazing things come of that? And the point of the small, bold action and the kind of framework we put around it is try and go for something that's repeatable, because behavior compounds and people will start to follow you. And that's essentially what, you know, Greta Thunberg did with her skipping school and protesting. She just kept on showing up. And it's a really simple, small thing to do. You just don't turn up to school. But so bold. And she sparked an entire global revolution. So you just don't know where it'll lead. Just try.
Yeah. Consistency with behaviors is, you know, that's what forms habits. It's actually fresh on my mind because it's a section of my book that I'm on right now, but it takes on average 66 days to form a new habit, and that's doing it every day. And it can take up to like 254 days, they found in some studies. I love that. Small, bold actions, you know, and being consistent with it.
Yeah. And it came from when we started to do workshops and we'd ask people to break a rule and try to say, what's your new rule? And it was in, you know, rooms of really smart people. They'd come up with these huge, almost like entire strategies for what needed to change. And I'd be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Realistically, within your schedule, you ain't getting that done. And that was where it came from. I was like, what is a small, bold action that would create the momentum, that would keep you going on this pirate journey and you can achieve in the next week? So it's got to be not logistically complex and not involve loads of other people and departments. It's got to be repeatable because you want it to compound, and it should be within the scope of the work that you're already doing. So you don't want to try and like create an entire new stream of thinking or doing for yourself. It's really about keeping the simplicity in it.
It reminds me of in university, I was taking sociology and they made us do experiments breaking social norms. So you had to follow the social norm and then break the social norm and see what the reaction was. So I did two different experiences. One was getting on an elevator and standing right face to face in front of someone for the elevator ride, rather than going in and turning your back and like pretending like the other person isn't there, and just feeling like how uncomfortable it is for you, but also for this person, like, what are you doing? You know, and it's just like, why do we care where someone stands on the elevator, you know? But it's like this very strict, like global social rule that when you get onto an elevator, you all face the door and you stand as far away from people as you can. And then the other was on a bus. You get on a bus, and if it's crowded, you sit next to someone, they don't have an issue. But if it's empty and you sit directly next to someone else that's on the bus, like, they start grabbing their purse. They think you're up to no good. You know, it's kind of crazy. So I like the small, bold actions, and there's very simple things that you can look at to go against like societal norms and just test that out and test the waters and see like, okay, like nothing bad is going to happen. But I'd like to throw my own advice into this mix as well, with people, you know, feeling like they can't make a change on their own. You can vote with your wallet. You can vote with how you spend your money, and you can affect change that way as well. So if you are making more conscious purchase decisions, that has a huge impact. So if you're spending with smaller businesses that have passion and they have purpose like built into their DNA, as opposed to large companies that have questionable practices, that's going to make a massive impact as well, particularly like with the food industry or companies that maybe they're exploiting child labor. It's like if we're not asking those questions and looking for transparency with these businesses and spending money with them, we're almost contributing to the problem.
Can I build on that slightly? Because I agree, I've thought about that a lot. And then I've thought about what are the problems that stop people from making those conscious consumer decisions and asking all those questions that need to be asked. And I think, you know, COVID has thrown a lot of this out of the water, which is great, but we are in an age of distraction. And there's just a small subsection in the book about like this concept of clear the decks. Like if we're going to really become pirates or start to challenge these norms and things that are really contributing to the systems that aren't working, then first of all, we actually have to stop doing a lot of things, like let go of a lot of crap that's in our lives, the clutter, like a real kind of culling. Like I often say, it's harder to let things go than to start things. And whether that's in a workplace setting and just having this kind of sense of overwhelm and going, oh, I'll do the ambitious thing, like getting rid of all of our single-use plastic when I've cleared my inbox and I've got through these meetings. And actually, you just need to delete the emails, not go to the meetings, and do the thing that matters. It's almost like a preparative step before you can get to that point of going, right, I'm awake now. I'm alert. I'm free to not kind of convenience buy off Amazon all day long because I'm too busy.
Yeah, well, I think it's been interesting with these last couple of months because people can't use the busy excuse anymore, and they're realizing that it's really terrifying to sit at home and sit with their thoughts and like, what do I do if I'm not working? How do I spend my time? What's my creative outlet? What do I actually want with my life or for the planet? So I think people have gone one of two ways. They're actually sitting with that and exploring it, and I feel like there's a lot of uprising coming because of this, and a lot of people have completely shut down. Having that time and space to sit with yourself, even that feeling of boredom or not knowing what to do, like that's a new thing for a lot of people. So, really taking the time, like maybe read this book, and that will inspire you to start thinking about these things and this revolution that you can be a part of, and actually like start making changes and go against these norms. It's a really exciting time, and I couldn't think of a better time for you guys to bring out the actual like how to do this. So tell me what's happening now and in the future for the Be More Pirate revolution.
Well, oh my God, it was a big thing with the book, getting those stories and the sort of framework like out there. And now I really want to move on to action. I want to be able to show that we need to focus on action. Actually, in many ways, I broke my own rules. Writing and talking about these things, like we've got to act. So, there's a few exciting things and things I want to support and work on. I had an amazing conversation this morning with a guy who's setting up a pirate academy, which I'm hoping to contribute to, which will be all-inclusive program to help people build like self-reliant communities and think about what humanity 3.0 looks like as we are at this real point of disruption where the current operating system will crumble. So we'll either break down or we really invest in something new. And I think decentralization is a huge part of that. And we're very aligned on what that looks like, and not just on things like building, how to literally help people build solar panels and grow their own food, but also the culture piece. Like, what is the new culture? Should we be supporting everyone to sort of do meditation? I'm not saying that I have the answers, but the questions that we need to ask, like what does constructive, non-polarizing dialogue look like between human beings as we move forward? Because we need it so badly, and politics is letting us down. So that's a really exciting thing, supporting their various endeavors in healthcare and the arts. One of the other things is that I'm keen to talk about is a campaign called Flat Pack Democracy, which is to support people to run for local councils in the UK, because we're going to have loads of local council elections, and to support people to run as independents specifically. So we get away from party politics, we stop this infighting that is destroying like our system, so that people from the communities who are invested in it have some power and influence over the local decision making and resources. It's a really simple premise and hits on the pirate principles of reorganize and redistribute power. And it's not that radical or controversial, I don't think, really. It's just a better functioning system, and it's been proven to work a few times. So I really want to get behind that campaign and support it as being quite pirate. Sorry, taking a breath. But yeah, and Sam and I will continue to kind of talk and do workshops with companies that want to dive into this material and advocate and talk to people about the concepts. So, and I continue to network people around it and support them to feel more empowered and share whatever learning I gain from different people.
It's super inspiring work that you guys are doing, and you've been very humble about it, but it's a massively important movement, and I encourage everyone to get both of the books, actually, because Be More Pirate is going to give you the history that's really inspiring, and How to Be More Pirate is going to tell you how to do it. And you guys are the only people I know that encourage people to either buy, borrow, or steal the books. So even being pirate about how you get your hands on the book, but they're really important works, and it's really exciting work that you guys are doing. And I'll link to everything down below in the descriptions of the podcast so you can find all of their stuff and hopefully be more pirate yourself. So My last question for you before we sign off is, how would you define living unrestricted?
Yeah, interesting. I think the biggest thing for me in being unrestricted is stopping caring what other people think. I think it's one of the hardest things. We're social creatures and we are hardwired to want to connect with each other. And yet it's so important that you pave your own way, that you listen to yourself and understand what's right for you. I think if you're predicating all your sense of self-worth and happiness on either the praise or the criticism of other people, you're just going to be running yourself around in circles. So the more you can do to try to shed that, the quicker you'll become to being unrestricted and living a freer life. Yeah, and that's not to say don't take advice from people or don't have a sort of sounding board of people you love, who love you, but don't take on board like the wider kind of narrative so much. Yeah, so that would be my advice.
I absolutely love that, and I agree wholeheartedly. When we live our lives dictated by wanting to please other people, we're not going to live the life that we really truly want ourselves. So what a beautiful way to end this chat. It's so exciting what you guys are doing, and thank you so much for taking the time. I know you guys have like tons of stuff going on right now with the book and this movement, so hopefully this inspires a few more pirates. And yeah, just thank you again for being here and doing what you do. It's really, really inspiring and important work.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure and lovely to speak to you. You're equally inspiring. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll see you soon.
See you soon.